went looking for trouble. And boy, I found her. She's in love with herself. She likes the dark. Grey Wolf Studios.
So, anyway, let's go on to the next topic after gear pitch, which is determining gear ratios. Now, there's a couple different aspects to determining gear ratios. The most basic example of gear ratios would be, well, let me just get a spur gear here. Hang on a second. Okay. This is a spur gear, a 63 tooth Mod 1 spur gear off of my Losi LST2. It's also the same one for the Losi XXL. Basically same kit. Determining now here's a comparison. We saw a minute ago how the 32 pitch didn't mesh very well with the Mod 1. Now that you see two Mod 1s together, you can tell how smoothly those fit together. You can really tell they just roll right around with no effort at all. So anyway, 63 tooth spur gear, 21 tooth pinion. So the most basic. Oh, I got my mat here. The most basic gear ratio and the most typical gear ratio for you to calculate is simply that of the ratio between your spur and your pinion. And to do that is very simple. You simply take the tooth count of the spur and divide the tooth count of the pinion into it. In this example, we have a 63 tooth spur and a 21 tooth pinion. So you would take 63 divided by 21, and that's going to give you your gear ratio it's going to give you your pinion spur ratio, which in this particular example would be a gear ratio of 3 exactly. I don't know why I can do that in my head, but anyway. So you have a gear ratio of 3-to-1 right here. Now, that little formula can be really handy because let's say, for example, that your kit that you have currently has, let's say, 48 pitch gearing, and the thing that I'm thinking about right now is my high-speed rustler. I have a high-speed rustler set up that is set up to do 100 plus mile an hour runs with a rustler. Now the stock rustler comes with 48 pitch gearing, but in order to transform mine into an RC that's capable of 100 plus mile an hour speeds, I had to do a lot of crap to it. One of the things that I had to do to it was I had to put I switched to Mod 1 gearing because Mod 1 gearing it's much more beefy, and it just I happen to be able to get Mod 1 gears that'll fit it, that I can basically get a 1-to-1 gear ratio, which means your spur is the same size as your pinion. Actually, I actually have custom built adapter that will actually let me run a bigger pinion than what I would have on my spur gear. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. So anyway, getting back to the story, in the case of my rustler, I switched out my 48 pitch gears to Mod 1 gears because it suited my purpose better. Now, originally, when I was still trying to kind of get up to speed with doing the the real high speed runs, initially I didn't want to just go straight to the 1-to-1 gearing. Initially, when I first put my Mod 1 spur gear on my Rustler, I wanted to keep the same gear ratio that I was using, so I could kind of have a point of reference. So basically, it would still run about the same as what it had been, and I just kind of wanted to get a feel for it to see if there was even any, if I could even tell a difference before I started, bumping up the pinion size. So that's where that little formula comes in handy. Now we know, well, and in this case, let's just say we did the math on our 48 pitch spur and our 48 pitch pinion, and it came out to let's say it came out to 3.000000015 or whatever. Let's say it came out roughly 3. So by doing a little math, we know we have a gear ratio of 3, and we know we have a Mod 1 spur that has 63 teeth on it. So in order to find out what size pinion will give us a 3-to-1 gear ratio, you simply multiply the teeth on the spur by your gear ratio, which is 3 in this case. Well, 63, or I'm sorry, you divide it by 3 rather, not multiply it. You multiply 63 by 3, and you get 21. So that's how you know what size pinion to put with this spur to get the same 3.0 gear ratio that we supposedly had with our 48 pitch gears. Let me just recap that example in a different way, because I'm not sure that way was entirely clear. Let's again, we'll use I'll use a real world example of the high speed Rustler. Originally, my high speed Rustler, when I very first started out, had a 76 tooth spur gear and a 28 tooth pinion. That's what I very first slapped on it when I first got it. Because I wanted to go faster than stock. I didn't even try the stock stuff. I knew I wanted to go faster than stock, so I went ahead and modded it right from the get-go. So 76 divided by 28 gives us a gear ratio of 2.714 blah 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 on down the line. We'll just round it off and say 2.7. So when I went to put and this is the real world example, when I went to put my high speed Rustler together, I wanted to keep that same 2.7 gear ratio to start with, and what I had on hand at the time was a 36 tooth Mod 1 spur gear. I had one of these that was only 36 teeth instead of 63. It was 36. So essentially, I just divided 36 by 2.7, and that gives me 13.3. So a 13 tooth pinion along with a 36 tooth spur gear would give me basically it wouldn't be exact, but it would be a very, very similar gear ratio to what I was using when I was using the 48 pitch gears. Okay, maybe I hope one of those two I hope one of those two examples was, made sense. So let's see. Now there's other aspects of gear ratio also. There's what you also have what's called a final gear ratio, which is basically eh, your final gear ratio takes into account every possible aspect of your kit that could possibly have any bearing on the overall gear ratio. So that would be your pinion, your spur, all the gears inside of your transmission, your front, all the gears in your front and rear diffs rather, differentials, um, and even tire size, which is actually called rollout. Um, your tire size or your tire rollout actually also plays a bearing in your overall final gear ratio. Now that's not something that you'll really ever use that much unless maybe you get into if you really get into the hobby hot and heavy and you start racing. um, Especially I think on-road cars, I believe, pay pay more attention to final gear ratio. Now I could be wrong about this because I don't really race, but at any rate, racing is like the only example that I can think of where you might actually, um, you might actually need to figure out what your final gear ratio is, or what have you. Other than that, other than maybe a racing from a racing aspect, really the only time I have ever wanted to know my rollout, and, my final gear ratio and all that stuff is just simply for using the hypothetical top speed calculators. Um, there's a couple out there that you got to plug all those, a bunch of different variables in to get your final overall gear ratio. So anyway, I think that's enough about gear ratios. That's really about it.